Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. This is John and Esther Wright with Word of Faith Fellowship, and we just wanted to take this time to share with you a little bit of what God's been doing in our lives. I want to start before we first got married, we were engaged, and in Proverbs chapter 22 and 23, it talks about not removing the landmark, and one of the landmarks that God put in our lives was to trust Him, and that we weren't going to trust money, we weren't going to trust things. We weren't going to put our trust in people, that we were going to trust God with our lives. And in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, it says, "Let your character and your moral disposition be free from love of money, including greed, avarice, lust, and craving for earthly possessions. And be satisfied with your present circumstances and with what you have. For God Himself has said, I will not in any way fail you, or give you up, or leave you without support. I will not in any degree leave you helpless or forsake or let you down or relax my hold on you." And we were engaged. We were preparing for a wedding. We needed finances. Esther was just finishing up nursing school, and neither one of us really had any money, and it was kind of bothering her at first. What are we going to do? She couldn't find a job, and one thing about nursing students when they graduate, a lot of times before they're hired, people want experience. Well, you can't get experience without getting a job. So we prayed. I remember where we were sitting. We prayed. We were talking about this, and God put it in my heart that no matter what happened, that we were going to trust God, that we were going to be known that we trusted God and that God took care of us. Mm-hmm. And so we prayed and we cried out to God, and we said, God, this is where we're at. We need help. We don't need money. We need you. We want you to be first in our life. And within a week, Esther had 2 jobs, and God has been taking care of us before and ever since. Mm-hmm. And in Psalms, there's the Bible's full of encouraging words about trusting God and what God will do for you when you turn your heart to Him, when you cry out to Him, and when you seek Him with all of your heart, that God will take care of you. And it's amazing just what God has to say, and all through the Bible really. But Psalms is one of my favorite books when it comes to trusting God, because it's just full of examples. And in Psalms chapter 5. In verse 11, it says, "But let all those who take refuge and put their trust in you rejoice. Let them ever sing and shout for joy." And that's one thing, when you trust God and you really, and your heart is really after God, God puts the joy in your heart, because you there's a stability and you're sure, because you know that God's going to take care of you, and you can rejoice. You can be happy. You don't have to be worried and concerned and just fretful, because you know God's going to be there for you. It says, "Let them ever sing and shout for joy, because you make a covering over them and you defend them. And let those who love your name be joyful in you and be in high spirits." And that's one of the works that God's been doing in our hearts, is that we can trust Him and that we can be happy and that we can enjoy life, because we know God's going to be there no matter what happens. God's going to be there to take care of us. And in the 10 years that we've been married, we've been through lots of different tests and trials. But the one thing that we've learned is that when we turn our heart to God, no matter what's going on, whether it's financial, whether it's physical, spiritual, if we just don't know what to do in a situation, that when we turn our heart to God, He's always there. He always hears our cry, and He takes care of us. And then Psalms 9, there's another example there. It's an excellent example. It talks about, so in chapter 9, verse 10, it says, "And they who know your name, who have experience and acquaintance with your mercy." And then that's what I can say about us for sure, is that we've definitely, through the things that we've walked through, had experience, and we've seen God's mercy in our lives, and we're so grateful for that. It says, "They will lean on and confidently put their trust in you. For you, Lord, have not forsaken those who seek, inquire of, and for you on the authority of God's word and on the right of their necessity." And that's one of the biggest things, is when you have the word of the Lord in your heart, when you know what God has said to you and the promise that God's made to you, if you trust Him, then that's really where your stability and your faith can be, and your trust is, because you know God said, and it's going to happen no matter what. And I think Esther had something on that note about having the word of the Lord.
Yeah, I want to give an example of, like you just read in Psalms chapter 9, when I was younger, I didn't really know what God wanted me to do or where I was supposed to go, but He really wanted me to move away from where I was. So He spoke to me that I was supposed to move over here to Western North Carolina. And whenever I did that and I said yes to God, He provided a job for me. He provided a place for me to stay. I got a new car. I mean, it's amazing what you do when you say yes to God. When he gives you that word of the Lord and he says, do this, and you obey, then it's amazing what God gives to you and blesses you. So with one of the very first scriptures that he gave to me whenever I moved here and had lots of, God, is this where I'm supposed to go? Is this what I'm supposed to do? But you always have that word of God to stand on. He gave me the verse in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 18. It says, and therefore the Lord waits and he looks and he's longing to be gracious to you. And therefore he lifts himself up that he may have mercy on you and show loving kindness. And that's what God did. He showed loving kindness to me. He showed me what he could do for me whenever I submit my heart to him and listen to his voice and inquire of him. For it says, his favor and his love and his peace and his joy and his matchless unbroken companionship. And, I expected God to do something for me. When he told me to move here, I expected him that he would move on my behalf. And I have seen that he's given me peace and joy and provided everything I needed here. I mean, I came from a very poor family and we did not have a whole lot, but whenever I moved here, God's provided everything for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. This, like I said, Psalms is just full of examples. I just want to read a couple more out of Psalms, and then I'll move on from there. In Psalms 37, chapter 37, verse 3, it says, trust in the Lord and do good, and so shall you dwell in the land and feast surely on his faithfulness, and truly you shall be fed. And that's what Esther was just talking about, the thing that we've been learning about trusting God. And it says do good. Don't be worried and anxious and concerned about how everything's going to work out. It says just hear God's voice, obey, do good, and you'll be taken care of. God will take care of everything that you need. It says delight yourself also in the Lord, and he will give you the desires and the secret petitions of your heart. And that's something that we've certainly found out, that even things that we may not have spoken out or said, but God put in our heart. And like she was talking about the word of the Lord, that God, when God speaks it to you, it's there. And if you believe God, that God's going to do it, that if you put your trust in him and you delight yourself in God and you do every day what he's telling you to do, just obey his voice, God takes care of the rest. He does. He gives you everything you need. And it says, commit your way to the Lord. Roll and repose or rest each care of your load on him. Trust also in him, and he will bring it to pass. And that's really the thing she was talking about. As young people, a lot of times we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. You graduate. Now what? Do you go to college? Do you get a job? How's this going to work out? Do you get married? How are you going to have everything that you need? But that this is one of the things that God has spoken to us, that you just trust God, commit yourself on him, just obey what he tells you to do every day, and God will take care of it. When God's put something in your heart, you don't have to worry about how it's going to happen or what's going to happen. Just do whatever God's telling you to do, and everything will it'll come to pass.
And then God's taught me that you should wait. Don't go out there and try to get it done yourself. God tells you something and he puts a word in your heart. You're going to do it. You want this to happen. You had to wait. I mean, God put it in my heart to move over here, but it took a little time for everything to fall into place. And, don't get ahead of God. Don't try to strive in your own way to get to God. There's times you have to wait and be patient, and he will bring it to pass. Let God take care of it for you.
Absolutely. And then in Proverbs 14, like she was just talking about, it talks about there's a way that seems right to man, but the end thereof leads to death. And that's one thing that we've been crying out for, is we don't want to go that way. We don't want to do what seems right to us. We don't want to try to make a way for ourselves or try to figure out how we can make things happen. Because it ends in death. One way or the other, it always ends in death. And we want to make sure that whatever is going on, whatever we need, whatever is happening, that we want to turn our hearts to God. Even if things are going good, if there's seems to be no problems, everything's taken care of, that we want to make sure that our heart is toward God and that he will lead us in the path that we need to go. And like she was just talking about being patient and waiting, in Psalms chapter 40, starting in verse 1, it says, I waited patiently and expectantly for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. And that's one of the biggest things too, is crying out to God, because we don't know. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to deal with situations. We don't know how to provide sometimes for the things that we need. And so that's where we've been is crying out to God. God, we need help, and it's not just when you're in a bad situation. It's just that's what God, when he created us in the beginning, and he created man after himself, the highest form of existence in the universe. He had spent the time creating everything before, and then he said, let's make man in our image so that we could be like him and fellowship with him. And that's what we've been learning. We want to cry out to God. We want to fellowship with God. We want to know what God has to say. And that's where, like I was talking about before, that trust, that stability that comes is because God said. And that's our hearts. He says he drew me up out of a horrible pit, a pit of turmoil and destruction. I know we feel, especially, like she was talking about when you're a teenager, when you're a young adult and you're trying to figure out what's next. And sometimes you feel that turmoil of now what? And it says he draws you out of that. He when you cry out to him, he brings you out. He shows you what to do. And it says, out of the miry the clay, and he set my feet on a rock, steadying my steps and establishing my goings. And that's what God does for us. When we cry out to him, and we just want to know, God, I want to know you, and I want to know your way. I want to know what's right. I want to do your will. And he does that for you. He gets all that torment and that uncertainty, the doubt goes away. And God gives you everything you need, whether it's a beautiful wife, wonderful children, friends in your life, family, whatever it is that you need to serve God, God gives it to you when you cry out to him. He says he's put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. And many shall see and fear, revere and worship, and put their trust and confidence in the Lord. And that's even, when we got married, God gave us a song. And that was part of the song that God gave us, is we want to be an example. We want to show people God and how good God is. And it really it's been absolutely the word of the Lord that God has given us, that God's blessed us even with our children. We were talking just the other day about how God provides for our children, and we go places, and it seems like almost everywhere we go, God's using somebody to give our children something, and we weren't even. Sometimes it's things that we may have thought of, like the secret petitions of our heart, and other times it's things we didn't even know we needed, and God just gives it to them. And it's a blessing that God gives, and He just shows His love for us, and it's not something that we had to strive and go after, or wonder how we're going to pay for them, how we're going to get this for them. God just does it. And it says, blessed, happy, fortunate to be envied is the man who makes the Lord his refuge and trust, and turns not to the proud or to the followers of false gods. And like I was saying before, that's where we are. We don't want to turn to false gods. We don't want to turn to mammon or to money or to people or things to try to figure out, how we're going to be taken care of. We want to keep our hearts. Just turn to God. God, you're going to take care of us. You've done this, everything that we've ever needed. You've never failed us, and you're there. We're going to trust you no matter what. We never want to lose that place of our trust in God.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say that, and then the other part of that is God will put something in your heart, and like I said earlier, you'll have that something else come before it and say, oh, well, maybe this is the right thing. But when you have that word in your heart from God that says, you're going to wait for it, and you don't want to believe a lie of the devil that says, this is it, this is what you need, go ahead, you can spend the money for this, or you can, go ahead and jump ahead of God. I mean, you got to have that truth in your heart that God said it's going to be this way, I want to just share also that the other thing is when you have someone in your life, whether it's like, John, God put John in my life. So I go to him and say, John, I really am wanting to get, I don't know. Well, I'll give an example of a new house. Like whenever God told us we were supposed to give a house, how much money can we spend, or how much this, or what do we need? And it was a lot to figure out, because you needed a certain amount of space. You needed to be in a certain area. You needed to be a certain amount. But, we know that God spoke to us that we were to buy us a house. And, one of the things I want to be is just living under God's authority in my life, and listening to my husband, or we both talk to each other. We know that God spoke to us, to said to do this. And then God provided a house for us with the right price and the right rooms, the amount of rooms, the right amount of bathrooms. I mean, even the things like you said, like you don't even know that you really would like to have, but you don't really have. I mean, it even has a pool. And, that's something that I always wanted when I was a little girl. And it's been a blessing to us and other people. And my children love it. And I want to read out of Psalms chapter 1 where it says, verse 1, "Blessed and happy is the man who walks and lives not in the counsel of the ungodly, following their advice, their plans and purposes, nor stands in the path where sinners walk." And I know that I do not want to, listen to the devil and listen to what he has to say and listen to how he is telling me to go or which way to go. And we don't want to sit down where the scornful and mockers gather, but his delight and desire in the law of the Lord and in his precepts and instructions. And I was waiting for God to instruct me and God to instruct John on which way to go and if this is the right house, and who habitually meditates by day and by night. And that's what God wants us to do, is we're inquiring and asking Jesus when we get up, when we go to bed, all day long. And that way he can speak to us. And I was looking around for this house. It's like, God, I was crying out to him, Jesus, I need a house, Jesus. We need a house, the right one, and the right one for children. And then at the time, his grandma was going to live with us, so we needed the right layout for it. Not like having steps. I mean, there were so many different things. And one day I was looking, and there it was. It was the house. It was exactly what God had for us. The perfect layout, the amount of rooms. And, I had other people tell me, oh, look at this house, look at that house. But it wasn't it. And then God gave us both that peace. And then it was the right price for us.
And I just want to add real quick, she was talking about the house. We didn't want a house just to have a house or to say we had a house. We wanted a house because we wanted to be a blessing. We wanted to provide for my mom, my grandmother. We wanted to make sure that they had what they needed in the right place. And that, she was talking about there were certain things that we needed there, like the access into the house. We needed to make sure it was the right place for my grandmother. At the time, she liked to sew. We needed a place where she could sew. Like Esther was saying, the secret petition that God had put in her heart, she really wanted a house with a pool. And like she said, we had looked at some other houses, and we were trying to hear, God, what's the right house for us? And then God it wasn't something we had to go out and waste a bunch of time looking and striving. God provided, God showed her the house, and then, we had peace, and that was the house. And it wasn't like we need this, we want that, it's not big enough, it's not right location. It wasn't any of that. It was the house.
Yes.
And we knew God did it, and it's been a blessing to us. It was a blessing to my grandmother, my children. Other people were able to come and enjoy the pool, and come to our house. And it wasn't something that we had to try to get to enrich ourselves. It was a blessing. God wanted to bless us. We cried out to him, and he blessed us.
And I mean, and then in verse 3 of Psalms chapter 1, it says, he should be like a tree firmly planted by the streams of water and ready to bring forth its fruit in its season. I mean, when God does something like this for you, or, where he's put something in your heart and then you see the fruit of it, it just plants you more firmly to know, I want to serve God. I want to be with God. I want to inquire of him, because we know that he's going to provide for us. I mean, it's just right there. It says, its leaf also shall not fade or wither, and everything he does shall prosper. I mean, everything God does prospers. And God said, like I said, to move here, I had prosperity. God gave us the house. It's been such a blessing to us. God gave us children, and they are such a blessing. God gave us his grandma and his mom, and they are blessings. And God gave us the church that we go to. I mean, it's such a blessing to have all of our friends and family in that church. God gave us pastors that we can go to for counsel. I mean, we don't have to turn to the world. We don't have to turn to money. We don't have to turn to things to get that happiness. We have God in our life that will give us joy and peace, and he has us prosper. It says, but it's not so with the wicked. They don't have that. They don't have the peace. Those disobedient and living without God are not so. They're like chaff. They're worthless, dead, without substance, which the wind drives away. And I know that me and John, and I am putting it into our children, we do not want to be that way. We don't want to be like the wicked. We don't want to live without God, and we don't want to be driven away and just like the wind, like a chaff. For the Lord knows and is fully acquainted with the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly, those living outside God's will, shall perish and end in ruin. And I mean, that's one thing that me and John teach our children is God will take care of us, but if we are going to give to rebellion and be disobedient and not cry out for the will of God, then you either have heaven or you have hell. And it's written in your book, what you do every day. And I know that we have purpose that we do not want to go to hell. We want to live with Jesus forever in heaven.
And she was just talking about instructing your children, and one of the warnings in Jonah, actually, he disobeyed God. God gave him a word, and he did not obey, and the judgment of God came on him. And then, but at least Jonah, in the middle of his trouble, he turned his heart to God. And one of the things it says when he's crying out to God, and in Jonah chapter 2, in verse 7, it says, "When my soul fainted upon me, crushing me, I earnestly and seriously remembered the Lord." And that's the thing, when we do miss it, or if there's something happens and we feel that doubt or fear or that anxiety, instead of being caught up in that, we want to turn our heart to God. And no matter what happens, wherever situation we find ourselves in, we want to turn our heart to God and not come under that lie of the devil that he's bringing. It says, "I earnestly and I seriously remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple." And it says, "Those who pay regard to false, useless, and worthless idols forsake their own source of mercy and loving kindness." And that's the fear of God that we want to have, and we want to put it in our children, that we don't want to forsake our own source of mercy and loving kindness, because God's been good to us, and we don't ever want to turn after idols or after something that's false, whether it's money or things or just a lie of the devil, that there's the grass is greener on the other side or anything. We want our heart to be turned to God, because that when you do, that mercy is there. Even if you missed it, even if you started down the wrong path and you didn't hear God or something, whatever's going on, when you turn your heart to God, that's the key. We want to turn our hearts to God. We want to cry out to God. We want to hear God's voice, and we want to let God take care of us. But God, He warns us. There was an example I wanted to share. It was before our oldest son was born. Esther was in a job situation. She was pregnant. Ended up, she lost her job, and I was in school. I was only working part-time. I was going to school full-time. She was kind of the main provider at that time. And she loses her job. We're getting ready to have a child. We have no money. We have a house. We have vehicles that we need to pay for. I have school that needs to be paid for. And then suddenly she has no job. So what are we going to do? So we cried out to God. That's the one thing. That's all we know to do, is cry out to God. That's the only thing that's ever worked. So why try anything else? So we're crying out to God. What are we going to do? So she's looking for a job. She goes to a job interview. On the way to the interview, an elderly gentleman pulls out in front of her. He didn't see her. She has nowhere to go. There's nothing but a ditch for her to go into besides being hit. So she swerves off into the ditch. She's 26 months pregnant. 26 weeks pregnant. 26 weeks pregnant. And I'll let her tell, her part of the story. But it could have been a devastating situation. It could have been a really bad situation. And I'm in class. She calls me. And, in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 23, the Shenamite woman, she was a blessing to the prophet of God. God blesses her with a child. The child grows up. He dies. And she immediately, instead of blaming God or blaming the prophet, her husband's asking her, what's going on? Why are you wanting to go see the prophet of God? And she says, out of her heart, I believe out of faith, she says, it's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. And that was the word that God gave me at that time to give to Esther. And that was the word of the Lord. It's going to be all right. And, she goes to the prophet, and God raises him up to life. And at that time, there was no amount of money could have saved that situation. I mean, there's no amount of money could have fixed what was going on there. But we turned our hearts to God, and God spoke to me, it's going to be all right. And I had peace, even when she told me what was going on, I had peace that she was going to be all right, that our son was going to be all right, because God said that we were going to have a son.
Right.
And that was in both of our hearts. Even before we knew it was a boy, God had already told us that we were going to have a son. So that word of God was locked in our hearts, and there was no doubt, because we knew God said. And even when the fear tried to hit her, she's just been in a major car accident. The car's totaled.
My seat actually shifted away, and the seatbelt had plugged me in. I could not get my door open. I mean, it was very frightening, and and I was by myself at the time, and I remember looking over, and I looked down, and I could see my phone. I could see people around, and there was smoke, and the glass had busted out of the back of my car. I mean, it was very frightening. It was very frightening. And all I can remember is grabbing that phone as soon as possible and getting on the phone, calling my husband. And I could see other people calling the police. So I was like, I don't need to call 911. I'm going to call my pastor and someone else. And I say, please tell them to pray. And the word of the Lord came to me through my husband and through my pastor and said, it's going to be okay. The baby is fine. And he was fine. I heard it was bruised, and I was, it was in pain for a few days and couldn't hardly move. But, God told us this is what's going to happen. We were going to have a child, and we knew that this is what God put in our heart, that we were going to have a little boy. And the next thing, there's the devil trying to destroy what God is doing. But it's like, no, we're not. God's in control, and we're trusting Jesus. We're trusting him.
That's right. And one more verse in Psalms, and I'll move on. But this is in Psalms. It's 136. It's starting in verse 23. It says, "To him who earnestly remembers us in our low estate and imprints us on his heart, for his mercy and loving kindness endure forever. And he rescues us from our enemies. His mercy and his loving kindness endure forever." And that's what Esther was talking about. God's always there. He gives food to all flesh, for his mercy and his loving kindness endure forever. And that's what she was talking about, God's longing. He's waiting to be gracious to us. So if we just turn our hearts to him. It says, "Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven, for his mercy and his loving kindness endure forever." And that's exactly what she's just talking about. God's there. He's just waiting to do good to us. He's waiting to be good to us. And and in Hebrews chapter 3, it warns us. I'm just going to read a couple of verses. It says in chapter 3, verse 12 in Hebrews, it says, "Therefore beware, brethren, take care, lest there be in any one of you a wicked, unbelieving heart, which refuses to trust in God." And it's a serious warning. It says, "While it's still called today, if you would hear his voice, when you hear it, do not harden your hearts." And that's what, like I said, we cry out. We want to hear God's voice. We don't want to be rebellious, like the people in the desert when they provoke God. It says in 18, it says, "To whom did he swear they wouldn't enter his rest, but those who disobeyed and wouldn't listen to him, refused to be compliant or persuaded." So it says they weren't able to will into God's rest because they refused to trust and believe in God. And that's what we don't want to be that way. We want our hearts to be that we don't want to be those rebellious, or we start doubting God, or we want to go a different way, or figure out how to do it ourselves. We want our hearts to be that we trust God. And one more verse, it's in 1 John. It's something that God's really worked in my heart. In 1 John 3:1, it says, "See what an incredible quality of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be permitted to be named and called and counted the children of God." And so we are. And it says, we don't even know what we're going to be hereafter, but when we trust God and we are become like God, it says he's there. And it says everyone, in verse 3, it says everyone who has this hope resting on him cleanses himself just as God is pure. And that's, like I said, we're crying out. Well, we want to be like that. We want our hearts to be torn toward God. We want to have a relationship with God. We want to be like him. We want our trust to be in him. And we just want to say thank you for joining us today. We're so grateful. We've enjoyed ourselves. We've been blessed. We hope you've been blessed. We have our programs on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 8:30 to 9. Or you can see any previous programs on the archive. It's wordoffaith.org. You'll be blessed. There's lots of testimonies there of other people sharing what God's done for them. Again, we just want to say thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you.